Hello, Owls, and welcome to ACT English for Owls, week number 5. This week, we're going to start tackling punctuation. So let's take a look at what we've got. In today's lesson, we're going to do an introduction to punctuation, just talk about it briefly. We're going to drill down on periods and commas, and then we're going to get ready for week 6. Should be a good time. So let's talk about sentence structure as it relates to basic punctuation skills. The ACT tests commas, semicolons, and apostrophes more than any type of punctuation. So that's going to be our first focus. They also want to know how you know about hyphens, colons, dashes, and other things like that. So we'll also do that in the coming weeks. I also want you to know the power of the period. And the reason that's important is because a sentence is a sentence. And when it comes to punctuation, all the ACT wants to know is within one sentence, what do you need to do with your punctuation? So as soon as you hit that period, you can back up and try and find out where that sentence starts, where the sentence ends, and just deal with that sentence. So the period becomes important. It's a big stop sign. And then finally, know how to repair any punctuation issues that you run into. So remember that punctuation is to writing as road signs are to driving. In other words, they're a gradual and quiet guidance tool that helps you navigate the road very smoothly, helps you make the right decisions and move in the right direction, helps you adjust your driving. And when you get used to driving, like you are when you're old like me, you notice the stop sign, you notice the yield sign, you notice the speed limit sign, but it's almost like it becomes second nature. They're not obstructing your view. They aren't a big deal. You just do what the sign says. And the same is true with commas and semicolons and colons and periods. Once you get used to reading some advanced text, they just gently guide the way you read the text so that you can understand them in your mind the way the author intended them. So here's what we will and won't cover in this series. Today, we're going to cover periods, commas, and in later episodes, we'll do semicolons and apostrophes, and then we'll touch on hyphens, dashes, colons, and other things, because not as many questions are about those last three, but periods, commas, and semicolons, and apostrophes to some extent really make up a lot of your punctuation questions on the ACT. So here are the punctuation questions that you took in that pretest. Now, if you didn't take the pretest, don't sweat it. That's fine. You can kind of ignore this part, or you can go back to week 2 and take that pretest still and get your scores. But if you did take it, then pause this. If you want to go back at some later point and look and see how you did specifically on these questions, these are the AC pretest questions that deal with punctuation. All right, so let's go. Let's get ready. Let's talk about periods. The all-important dot. There are 4 rules about periods, and I'm going to show you a sentence here in a second, a couple of sentences that kind of show how periods are used, but there's 4 ways to use it. The first is use a period to end a declarative sentence, but not an exclamatory, that's an exclamation point, or an interrogative, that's a question mark, sentence. So a period comes at the end of the sentence, just like at the end of number 1, you see a period. Number 2, use a period correctly when using quotation marks, parentheses, braces, brackets, and other isolating marks. We'll see an example of that on the next slide as well. But some ways of doing it, put the period inside the quotation mark or inside the parentheses or outside the parentheses. Pretty easy rule, but we'll get to that in a minute. Number 3, use periods and 3 spaces to indicate the omission of words or maybe an important thoughtful moment. That's called an ellipses. We'll take a look at that. And then finally, use a period after abbreviations such as Mr., as in Mr., or Saint, or Street. Oh, there's a T missing there. My apologies. You get your money back. ST period can either be Saint or Street. And doctor can either be doctor or drive. And MS can be Miss, Mrs., or Ms. So whenever you have a title like Mr. or Saint or doctor or Miss, or if you have like a street or a drive, you will use an abbreviation, a period after that abbreviation. All right. So let's take a look at an example. I'll read this out loud first, and then we'll break down the periods which are noted in green. The researcher noted that the children who watched at least 5 hours of Mr. Rogers experienced better social skills overall. He did not note that these skills were permanent. Dr. Smith determined that children were more likely to enjoy life based on self-reporting. Wait a minute. Does that mean that TV is good for kids? Okay, so that's our sample sentence. Let's take our periods one at a time. The first is after Mr., we have this period right here. All right, you use a period after things like Mr. And then we have after Rogers, we have a space, a period, a space, a period, space, period, space. So it's a total of 5 spaces and a total of 3 periods, each separated by a space. What this means is because I'm using a quotation, let's say I've taken this out of an academic study and I'm citing, I'm embedding citations, I'm embedding text from research. The ... inside of a quotation from academic research tells the reader that the author, that's me, chose not to include a chunk of words. Maybe there was something after Mr. Rogers. So, for example, maybe the original sentence was, the children who had watched at least 5 hours of Mr. Rogers, comma, the children's television host from the 1970s and 80s who inspired a generation of children to watch TV, comma, experience better social skills. Well, maybe I don't want that whole piece about him being an inspirational TV host in the 70s. Maybe I just want to cut that out. So the ... means that I am omitting some words intentionally from the original author's words. All right. Now, we have this period. It's our next period. It's tucked inside the quotation mark. Notice that it's last word of the quotation, period, then your quotation mark. That period serves as the period of the sentence and of the quotation. So in other words, we don't need another period after the quotation mark. Now we open a parentheses and say he did not know that these skills were permanent. This time, this period is tucked inside the parentheses. Later on down here, you'll see that it goes outside, and here's the difference. If the entire sentence is inside of parentheses, you tuck the period. If only a portion of the sentence is inside parentheses, you leave the exclamation point or period or question mark on the outside. Next, we have the word doctor. Dr. Smith determined that children are more likely to enjoy life. And then again, we have our terminal punctuation, in this case, an exclamation point. But if that were a period, it would be the outside of the parentheses because only part of the sentence is in parentheses. Whereas up here, we had the whole sentence in parentheses. All right. And then now we have an ellipses, ... with spaces in between, but this time it's used a little bit different. I am not quoting or citing academic text as I was up here. This ellipses means I'm leaving out some of the original author's words. This means it's a thoughtful moment. Wait a minute, pause. Does that mean TV is good for kids? And the final thing is, sometimes you have abbreviations that are so well known, they don't need periods. And TV is a good example. You don't need T.V because it's an abbreviation for television, because it is such a well-known abbreviation that it has become its own word. And then finally, we have a question mark at the end, just showing you how to use the question mark, exclamation point, and period. All right, that's it for periods. Let's go on to commas and commas and commas. And I got a joke here. I don't care who you are. This slide is hilarious. Let's talk about 7 comma laws. There are 12 good reasons on that practice test. This is from a different ACT practice test, but the average ACT test has about 12 questions that are just related to commas or instances where you could use comma, but the correct answer is a semicolon or a dash or something like that. But there are at least 12 questions on this pretest that I used that have to deal with making decisions about commas, whether to use them or not use them. Now, the much longer list is that commas separate ideas. Independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction, introductory clauses, introductory interjections or names, words in a series, 2 or more adjectives before a noun, contrasting phrases or words, clauses using not, interrupting words, interrupting phrases, dates and places, professional titles. That's a big, long, ugly list. I'm really just going to break it down into 4, and then we'll kind of scattershot the last 3. So there's one basic comma rule to remember. Commas separate clauses, they separate introductions, and they separate lists. If you can kind of remember that, that makes it much easier than this list right here. So they separate clauses, introductions, and lists. That's going to be our 3 main rules. We'll touch on one more, and then we'll get to the last 3. So that's 7 total. The first is know your independent clauses. We covered last week's sentence structure, and an independent clause is a complete sentence that has a subject, it has a predicate, it can stand by itself. It's a fully complete and whole sentence. If that is all it is, it's just an independent clause with no punctuation, that's what we call a simple sentence. If you have 2 independent clauses back to back, we call that a compound sentence. And that yellow circle, this circle right here, means that you have to do something to connect these 2 independent clauses. And there's 3 or 4 ways to do that. We'll get to that on the next slide. You could also have a dependent clause and an independent clause, but that needs to be connected somehow as well. While the tornado tore through the town, comma, we all hid in the basement. We all hid in the basement is an independent clause, and while the tornado tore through the town is a dependent clause, and you might use a comma to separate that. And then compound complex is an independent clause followed by some sort of punctuation or conjunction or both, followed by an independent clause, followed by a dependent clause. We're not going to get too much into this down here, but we will cover that compound sentence. So when you have an independent clause followed by another independent clause, and I'll show you examples, you need something to connect them. So there's three rules. The first rule is independent clauses are separated by a comma when they are joined by a coordinating conjunction. Here's our example. I went to the store. That's an independent clause. I bought some bread. That's an independent clause. Now, if we want to join them with a coordinating conjunction, in this case, the word and, we would use a comma. Now, there's only 7 coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And when you take the first letter of each one, they spell out fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Your fanboys are your coordinating conjunctions. There are only 7 coordinating conjunctions. There are never going to be 8 in your lifetime or mine. There are never going to be 6 in your lifetime or mine. There's just 7 coordinating conjunctions. So when you have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, and you use them to connect 2 independent clauses, you just need a comma. You'd be surprised how often in our writing we forget this comma. You say, I went to the store and I bought some bread, but we forget that comma, not realizing we have 2 independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. I could say, I went to the store for I bought some bread. I went to the store, so I bought some bread. I went to the store, yet I bought some bread. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are your coordinating conjunctions. Number 2, independent clauses are separated by a semicolon when there is no conjunction. Same sentence, but now a little stronger. I went to the store, I bought some bread. That's perfectly good writing, especially when these sentences are meant to go together, and they're more impactful if you don't have this coordinating conjunction. Well, if you're going to do that and leave out the word to help conjoin these independent clauses, then you need to strengthen your punctuation and bump it up to a semicolon. I went to the store, semicolon, I bought some bread. This sentence is accurate and this sentence is accurate because they both have 2 independent clauses joined by either a comma and a coordinating conjunction or a semicolon with no conjunctive word. And then finally, independent clauses are separated by a semicolon and a comma when they're joined by a conjunctive adverb. Conjunctive adverbs are words like instead, consequently, however, therefore, still, hence, etc. I went to the store, semicolon, however, comma, I did not buy anything. So here we've got a semicolon, and here we've got a comma and a weak transition, and here we have both, a semicolon, a very strong transition, and a comma. Weak transition needs a comma, no transition needs a semicolon, powerful transition like a conjunctive adverb needs both a comma and a semicolon. I went to the store, semicolon, however, I did not buy anything. Now, one last thing to note, if you didn't have the word I here, you would have a phrase. I went to the store and bought some bread. No period, no comma, no transition. I went to the store and bought some bread. No semicolon. I went to the store, however, I did not buy anything. That's fine because I did not buy anything. If you say I went to the store but did not buy anything, you would not need that because did not buy anything is not an independent clause. So make sure you're connecting 2 independent clauses first, and then decide, do you want in your own writing a coordinating conjunction, a semicolon, or a powerful transition word like however. Comma law. Oh, here's some practice. All right, very good. The tree can't be trimmed. The tree can be trimmed, but can't be cut down. I've got a fanboys, for and no but, or yet so, fanboys, there it is, the word but. This is an independent clause. This is a phrase, so I don't need a period. Can't be cut down is a phrase. If I said it can't be cut down, now I've added a subject, and now I've got an independent clause, but can't be cut down is only a phrase. So I don't need anything other than the word but to connect these 2 ideas. Now I have 2 independent clauses. The tree can be trimmed, but it can't be cut down. Independent clause, same word, but now I need a comma. And I need a comma because if I'm connecting an independent clause to a phrase, I don't need a comma. But if I'm connecting an independent clause to an independent clause, just like we see on this slide, connecting an independent clause to an independent clause, now I need a comma because I'm using a coordinating conjunction, fanboys. Here's another independent clause. The tree can be trimmed, semicolon, it can't be cut down. That's an independent clause. The tree can be trimmed, semicolon, however, comma, it can't be cut down. So these examples are the same. So this one is the same as this one, and this one. I've just added the little one with the phrase here. All right, so there's your practice. All right, comma law number 2. The comma, use comma to separate introductory phrases and clauses. When we look at something like One Day in 1913, the section's editor, or after his debut in December, or although he never saw it, or hey, Tom, or whatever it is, you have a piece of the sentence that comes before the main idea. The sentence is technically, he became famous after his debut in December, but you can cut it in half and rearrange it for style. And it just makes it for a more mature sentence. Like the reader might prefer to read, although, or after his debut in December, he became famous. That's a little bit more mature writing than he became famous after his debut in December. But if you're going to flip it around like that, you're going to use what's called an introductory phrase or clause. Now, in this case, and I don't want you to get too wrapped around the axle about this, you have a preposition here and a preposition here. And the rule is that if you have two prepositional phrases as an introductory phrase, you use a comma. Now, the rule is if you just have one, after his debut, he became famous, rule says you don't need a comma. In December, he became famous, rule says you don't need a comma. You've got, if you, in other words, if your introductory phrase, and what they do is they say 4 or more words. If you have 4 or more words, some people say more than 4 words. Now, the ACT is not going to get that precise where it's 4 words versus 5 words. Don't worry about that. If you have a long introductory phrase, like after his debut in December, clearly more than 4 words, probably a couple prepositional phrases, a comma would be appropriate. If you have a dependent clause like although we never saw it, because we never saw it is a complete sentence, you throw on although, now it's not a complete sentence. And then after it, the monster could be heard for miles. That is a complete sentence. So you have a dependent clause followed by an independent clause, then you'd want a comma. A mild interjection would be, hey, Tom, comma, you forgot your lunch. So in all of these, you have some stuff at the beginning of the sentence preceding the main idea. He became famous is the main idea. The monster could be heard for miles is the main idea. You forgot your lunch is the main idea. And then once again, if some say an introductory phrase in more than 4 words requires a comma. All right, we'll get to these two a little bit later on, but I want you to see one day, comma, in 1913, the section's editor. I can tell you right now, it should be one day in 1913, comma, the section's editor. Okay. And after the puzzle's debut in December, comma, requests from readers came pouring in. Comma law number 3, use a comma to separate 3 or more nouns or 2 or more adjectives. So here are nouns. We ate cookies, comma, ice cream, comma, and donuts. You do not need a comma after your transition word or after your conjoining word. You would not say we ate cookies, comma, ice cream, comma, and comma, donuts. Don't do that. Just say cookies, ice cream, and donuts. That's 3 or more nouns. We ate cookies, ice create. I just created a new dessert there. Donuts, comma, and cake. So even if I have 125 desserts, I'm just going to use comma, comma, comma after each one, no comma after this. If you've ever heard of the Oxford comma, that's this bad boy. Some writers, especially journalists who want to save on type and space, would tell you we ate cookies, comma, ice cream, comma, donuts, and cake, with no comma before your last, second to last one. That's called the Oxford comma. The ACT does prefer that you keep that in. Now we spend our time loading the car, comma, organizing the trunk, comma, and practicing or packing our stuff. This is a list of 3 things we did. We spent our time doing 3 things: loading the car, organizing the trunk, and packing our stuff. And you know it's a list because they could probably be interchangeable. You could say we spent our time packing our stuff, organizing the trunk, and loading our car. Okay, so comma after each one. Or 2 or more adjectives. This is the newest, comma, fastest car. She is the prettiest, comma, sweetest, and friendliest cat. Now here, you could put a comma right here if you wanted to. She is the prettiest, comma, sweetest, comma, and friendliest cat. All right, finally, comma rule number 4. You will use 2 commas to separate non-essential interrupters and phrases that come in the middle of a sentence. So in other words, the first example, Tom is now a poet. But I've added, for context, to give more clarification, to give the reader more depth and understanding, I've added my college roommate. Tom, my college roommate, is now a poet. This is not essential. It is not key to the grammatical structure of the sentence. It's extra, Now, as the writer, it's good extra. You want your reader to know all this information, but it's extra. It is not pertinent and it is not essential. You could have just written, Tom is now a poet. Easy. But you're adding in some additional phrase. Tom, comma, my college roommate, comma, is now a poet. 25 dolphins, comma, all of which are wild, comma, return to the shoreline. The true sentence is 25 dolphins return to the shoreline. The non-essential phrase is all of which are wild. So you'll use two commas to separate these. I am, you see, quite brilliant. Two commas. Sarah, 38, has never been to the doctor. I can live without my college roommate, all of which are wild, you see, and 38, because they're not essential to the sentence. But now let's look at one that is essential to the sentence. All taxis that are dirty will be cleaned immediately. Now here's the deal. This is essential to the sentence because that are dirty would change the sentence if we left it out. If we said all taxis will be cleaned immediately, that's not what the author is trying to say. The author is trying to say that all taxis that are dirty will be cleaned immediately. You see, Sarah has never been to the doctor regardless of her age. I am quite brilliant whether or not you see it. 25 dolphins return to the shoreline whether or not they were wild. And Tom was a poet, is now a poet, regardless of whether he's a college roommate. But not all taxis will be cleaned, only those that are dirty. So this that are dirty is an essential interrupter. No commas needed there. All right, 3 additional comma rules. Use commas to separate contrasting words and phrases, clauses introduced by not. I will vote for Tom, comma, not Bill. Use a comma to separate parts of dates, geographical names, and addresses. On October 2nd, comma, 2000, comma, my grandparents renewed their wedding vows. I live in Olathe, comma, Kansas, comma, USA. The ACT is not probably going to give you many questions on any of these 3, but I just want you to see that they are comma rules. Use a comma, separate professional degrees or titles. There you go. Some examples right there. If you want to study that, you can. I don't think the ACT is going to ask you any questions about anything on the slide, but they are there. So the 3 comma rules, just to review, I'm going to back up. Use independent clauses separated by coordinating conjunctions or semicolons or conjunctive adverbs is number 1. Number 2 is introductory phrases or clauses. And number 3 is non-essential, lists and nouns and adjectives. And then number 4 is non-essential interrupters and phrases. Okay, then you got these additional 3 comma rules. All right, so it's your turn. Here's what we're going to do. I want you to, and I think I can move this. I'm moving my video. If it doesn't move it on your screen, then that's fine. But I want you to hit pause, and I'm giving you 9 questions that are actual ACT questions that all have to do with commas. Some of them you need the comma, some of them you don't need the comma. But go ahead and hit pause, write down your answers on a scrap of paper. I know my questions are out of order, but I did it for space rather than sequence. So 62, 38, 6, 7, 11, 12, 23, 24, 32, 73, 55, and 70. Yeah, they're out of order. On the next screen, I will show you the answers. So at this time, I'm going to give you time to hit pause, work through all of these, and then when you're ready, hit unpause, and I'll show you the answers, give you a chance to write them all down, check your answers, and then we'll do our last slide. Hit pause now. Okay, here are your answers. Go ahead and check them against what you wrote down. This is a good time for you to hit pause again and review why you got questions right, why you got questions wrong. Come see me in the building here at Olathe West, room 1523. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stop and talk to you and explain why some of these are right, some of these are wrong. But here you go. All right, I'm moving on. So if you haven't hit pause, hit it now. All right, and week 6, all you have to do is look at your pretest course to see how you did on the punctuation questions. If you took the pretest, if not, feel free to start looking at commas in the wild and see how you did. So that's all I've got for this week. I'll see you next week.